Section 2, Unit 3, Interview. The King of Bad Taste. Michel Parks interviews a very rich and famous popular entertainer, a pianist who plays classical music in a wildly romantic and spectacular way. He's also famous for his extravagant clothes and 3 huge pianos, which, as he will tell you, do some very unusual things. His name is Stapatsky.
Stapatsky, you have been called the King of Bad Taste. Does that disturb you?
Oh, yeah. I cry all the way to the bank.
You mean it's all right as long as you make money?
Well, once a critic said I ought to be horsewhipped for playing music the way I do. But all I really do is give people what they want. What's so terrible about that? Besides, who can really decide what good taste is and what bad is? Can you tell me that? What's bad taste?
Perhaps you have a point, but let me turn to your career now. I mean, when you began as a pianist, how shall I put it, you stuck to the usual conventions, didn't you?
If you mean did I wear one of those black suits and ties that made me look like a head waiter and look solemn and miserable when I played, as if I were at a funeral, the answer is yes, but not for long. I soon developed my own style.
Just where and how did you begin to develop your own style, as you call it?
Well, as you know, I was born and raised in New York City in America, and after I left the Conservatory of Music where I studied, I started giving piano recitals in small towns, all over America. I wasn't in the big time in those days. Well, anyway, one evening I was in, I can't remember exactly, but I think it was in Wisconsin, and if I'm not mistaken, the audience consisted mostly of rich farmers. And they were all sitting there like a lot of sleeping zombies, if you know what I mean. It was a really hot evening, and there I was, practically glued to my piano stool in my own sweat. It was dripping off me. And let me see, as far as I can remember, I was playing something by Chopin, and I could see, that they just weren't enjoying it and were ready to fall off their chairs with boredom. So I stopped playing and stood up.
You mean you stopped in the middle of a piece?
Exactly. And I shouted something like, I can't remember exactly, come on now, folks, what would you really like to hear? Well, at first they looked at me as if I were a madman, but at least they were all awake. Someone tittered, but someone else called out, what about Old MacDonald Had a Farm? That's
a nursery song. Very simple, yes.
Yeah, kids sing it. Well, since they were bored with Chopin, and so was I, and since they wanted me to do something else, I just did it. But I didn't just play it as a simple song. Instead, I played it in a kind of wild Chopin style. Really wild, if you know what I mean. And they loved it, lapped it up, went wild.
And soon after that, you started playing nightclubs.
Yes, because I decided, first of all, to play Bach and Beethoven and Chopin in a very popular style. Romantic, too, and also to give people a real spectacle. I started wearing fancy clothes. A suit of mine lights up in the dark when I play and glows like a Christmas tree. I've got another suit that's made of silver and diamonds.
And your pianos,
They're a special part of my act. I've got to have 3 because I do 3 different kinds of shows. One piano is for the shows I do for younger people. It's black like a coffin, but it lights up too and makes other noises as well. It's got a motorcycle horn and other things on it, a special device, for example, that sounds like a big drum. And then the second piano is for nightclubs. It's a bit smaller and it's all white with diamonds in it, diamonds that sparkle and glow. And the third piano is the one I play at home. It's got a big mirror and a spotlight on it, and I play it only for friends.
I gather your father, who still lives in New York, doesn't approve of all this.
Right. Dad's a bit odd. He paid for my music lessons when I was a kid and really loves the old composers. And he often says, "How can you do such a thing, son? It's terrible of you to play Bach and Chopin that way." Even when I show him all the money I earn now, he still doesn't approve. Old people are a bit strange, I guess.
Unit 2, Section 4, Interview. Football hooliganism. Michelle Parks discusses the causes of the violent behavior of football fans and possible ways of preventing it. Her guests are Sir Cyril Brown, a Member of Parliament, who frequently makes speeches about the breakdown of law and order, and Christopher Marston, a sports journalist.
Sir Cyril, I know you have very strong views on the subject of football hooliganism.
Very strong indeed. I am sickened and disgusted by the way so many football fans behave.
Could you give an example of the behavior you have in mind?
There are hundreds of such examples.
Yes, but could you give us just one?
Very well. Think of last Saturday. A number of Manchester supporters found themselves on the same platform in a London tube station with a group of London fans. The London team had, I gather, just beaten the Manchester one. And what happened? There was a riot. The platform was wrecked. But far worse, 40 people at least were seriously injured. That is only one example. And
Before you go on, Sir Cyril, I wonder if I could ask Christopher Marston how he feels.
Well, I'm certainly deeply disturbed.
Disturbed? Disturbed? Only disturbed?
Well, let me go on. All violence is serious, but you say such violence is typical. And yet each Saturday during the season, there are as many as 48 professional matches going on all over the country. Serious violence occurs at perhaps one or two of these matches. And it is always these examples that we read about, and not about all the other matches where there was no violence at all.
But why, in your opinion, does such violence occur at all? And how do you think it can be stopped?
I am absolutely convinced that it is only one symptom of a general breakdown of law and order. And I am sure the main cause of this is the fact that the law itself has no teeth. When people are caught, they are let off far too lightly. Their punishment, if that's what it can be called, is usually a £25 fine and a lecture.
I'm not in favor simply of increasing fines and other forms of punishment. I'm more interested in prevention.
There's no doubt in my mind.
How can you possibly prevent something by punishing people after they've done it?
By showing others that they cannot get away with such
Fines and
things.
punishments haven't worked so far.
Only because they haven't been stiff enough.
How would you stop the violence, Christopher?
In my opinion, the football clubs themselves must do something. For example, I would suggest banning anyone found guilty of violent behavior from all football matches for a year.
I still don't think we've answered the question, why does such violence occur?
I believe that one of the causes is boredom. People in their lives simply...
Boredom? So now you're saying that football isn't exciting enough for the hooligans?
Perhaps you'd let me make my point. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is too many people's lives are boring. For most of the week they live dull grey lives in offices or factories. Nothing they do has any importance. Football provides a cheap substitute for the drama and excitement that is lacking the rest of the time. They can shout, cheer and boo, probably the only time they can do such things at all. And they can blow off steam, blow off all the aggression which they can't express the rest of the week.
I'm still not sure we found any answers or solutions, but thank you both very much.
Section 2, Unit 5, Interview, White Death. Michelle Parks talks to an expert on sharks, Charles Kling, and a diver and underwater photographer, Ray Laster. Kling has written a book on sharks, and Laster has actually been attacked by one and is still alive to tell the tale.
I saw a film recently in which a huge shark attacks a young girl and eats her alive. There's a crowd of people on a beach only a stone's throw away. Charles Kling, can such things really happen?
It depends where you are, of course, but in places like Australia, certain parts of Africa, and even the coast of Florida. Such things do happen every year.
Well, luckily they can't happen here.
That isn't quite correct. As a matter of fact, they can. Sharks are seen fairly frequently off the English coast, the Atlantic coast in particular. And not long ago, off the Scottish coast, one attacked a swimmer and ripped off his leg.
Really? I always thought, I was under the impression that sharks attack human beings only in warm conditions. In the Pacific or the Caribbean, for instance. That is, somehow I was sure that...
No. In point of fact, sharks attack in much colder conditions. But it is true, of course, that they're more likely to attack when the water temperature reaches about 18 degrees centigrade. They become hungrier then and come much closer to shore looking for food.
Ray Laster, tell us about your experience.
Well, about 10 years ago, I was doing some underwater photography off the Australian coast. I was just about to come up and get into the boat when suddenly this huge shark came out of nowhere and sank its choppers, teeth into me.
You must have been terrified. Weren't you frightened out of your wits?
I go white with fear when I think about it now. But strange as it may seem, at the time I was just dazed. I hardly realized what was happening.
But surely you were in terrific pain.
No. You may find this hard to believe, but I felt almost nothing. If anything, I felt sick.
And how in the world did you get away?
Well, you see, the shark had bitten into my shoulder and chest, and half my arm was actually sticking down his throat, so it couldn't bite or swallow properly. With my free arm, I managed to hit it hard in the nose, and I stuck a finger in its eye. Suddenly, it just let go. When they pulled me into the boat, I was bleeding like a stuck pig, but luckily I was all in one piece.
Charles Kling, how intelligent are sharks?
Oh, they have very tiny brains.
And what's their strongest sense?
They can smell even a tiny drop of blood half a kilometer away.
In other words, it's their sense of smell.
Yeah. And they're also very sensitive to vibrations from a swimmer or a ship, for example.
And their eyes?
It may surprise you, but they have a very poor sense of sight. They're even colorblind.
And what should we do if attacked by one?
Try to kick or hit them in the eyes or on the snout. And if you're religious, it might help to pray.
Side 2.
Section 3, Listening Passage 1.
And now for the rest of the news. Hanley Park Prison was the scene of a daring escape today. Here to tell us about it is Jeremy Alsop, our Birmingham radio news reporter.
At exactly 12:30 this afternoon, a furniture lorry parked outside the prison wall. It is 18 feet high and in a side street that runs outside the part of the prison where the main exercise yard is located. Over 100 prisoners were there at the time. Apparently, 2 men climbed from the lorry through a hole in its roof and up a metal ladder to the top of the wall. They then immediately lowered 2 other ladders down to a small group of prisoners on the other side. As is now clear, this group of prisoners must have been informed of the exact details of the escape plan beforehand. Prison guards were at first prevented from reaching them by another group of prisoners who began to riot. Several guards fought their way through them and stopped all but 2 prisoners from climbing up the ladders. Of the 2 who managed to do so, 1 man fell after he'd reached the top, hurting himself badly. The other, however, escaped in the lorry. Although a full-scale police alert was called only minutes after the escape, the lorry appears to have got away successfully. The prisoner who fell was left behind. Although police have not confirmed any details, it is understood he is now in hospital with a broken back. Order has been fully restored in the prison itself.